Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in. Well, first, Noah, on behalf of listeners, just want to say happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
And that's a cool hat for people listening in. Why don't you say what it is?
I have no idea what it is. It is my friend got it for me at the Japantown Festival a couple days ago. She just saw it in a pavilion and said Noah would like this hat. I think it's supposed to be a rabbit bun. So it's like a bun and drinking boba.
Amazing. Love it. Everyone's got a signature emoji or signature style, and yours is the rabbit. There's no one who's got better rabbit PR than you do, perhaps.
I'm committed to the bit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of the bit, we've got a number of questions that came in after our last episode. As a reminder, we put the email in the show notes. We welcome all questions. We're going to be getting to most of them. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So first, one second, let me just put up really quick. Okay, so this is from listener Joshua Milton. So Joshua says, I found the insights about the growing power struggle between authoritarian and democratic powers instructive and a helpful frame. Noah's warnings about possible World War III and or Cold War II are particularly visceral for me. What can the U.S. do to help contribute to improving its readiness for such conflicts? I feel somewhat at a loss.
Right. So there's a few things we need to do. The main thing, above all else, the thing we need to do is resuscitate our defense industrial base. So defense industrial base means defense manufacturing. For example, ships. Everyone says China can make an infinite number of ships. We can only make a few. Yeah, but that's including commercial shipping, right? Because commercial shipping is very simple. It's just basically like, it's a lot simpler than what Navy ships have to do. Navy ships are incredibly more complex. The United States has almost never had a commercial shipbuilding industry. We built those Liberty ships, the transports. Everyone knows about the Kaiser shipyards. If you've read Freedom's Forge, which you should, during World War II, we built a ton of these ships, and we basically threw together this massive industry very quickly. But then it got dismantled when the war was over, and Kaiser went bankrupt, and we didn't ever build commercial ships again. And we don't build any commercial ships, but we built a ton of Navy ships. Our naval shipyards were incredibly productive. We need to get back to that. So we need our naval shipyards to get humming again. We need our munitions plants to get humming again. We need missiles, lots of missiles. We also need drones. We need lots and lots and lots of drones. And, we just need to massively scale up. So drones are an industry where there is a ton of overlap between the commercial civilian industry and the defense industry. So that's going to be, that, and semiconductors are another thing where there's huge overlap. So basically, we need to just be able to produce defense stuff again. Also, there's a lot of vulnerabilities to China in our defense industrial chain. We depend on China for a lot of the parts and components to make weapons, and we need to sort of start getting the critical components out of China, figure out ways to reshore, friendshore that, right? So not necessarily make it all in America, but at least make it in Mexico, Canada, maybe Japan, maybe India. Certainly not China. And so those are the top things we need to do. The United States builds stuff very expensively and slowly, and people say we've forgotten how to build stuff, but that's actually not true. We're actually still good at building stuff. What's happened is that we've lost the institutional capacity to build stuff. So, for example, we have the massive environmental reviews that everyone knows about, but there's a whole lot of other steps in the chain. Things like land acquisition, eminent domain, things like labor law that also need to be streamlined and upgraded in order to produce more defense stuff. Are we going to be able to produce as much as China? Never. It'll be higher tech than China, so that's good. But we will never be able to produce as much as China, but we'll be able to produce a lot more than we are now. The second thing we need to do, which Biden has actually made a lot more progress on than the defense industrial base. So to be clear, Biden is doing not great at the defense industrial base thing. He's not taking it seriously. Trump didn't even know this was on the radar, and there's very little chance Trump will take this seriously because the Ukraine war has spurred our defense industrial base a bit. When you hear about contractors like Anduril, Skydio, and all these defense contractors kind of gearing up or getting a lot more interest, that is the Ukraine war. That's what did that. And when you hear about munitions plants being restarted in Alabama or wherever, that is also the Ukraine war. So people who are like, we should withdraw support to Ukraine. Well, Ukraine has why are we spending all this money on Ukraine when we could be spending it on, I don't know, whatever, nonprofits, whatever the fuck we spend it on. The point is that, no, the money that we're spending on Ukraine is going to U.S. defense contractors. And along with that, there is some actual urgency that we actually need to get stuff built instead of just handing money to defense contractors to sort of pay themselves out, right? So there's the Ukraine war has created pressure to actually build things. Now, is it enough pressure? No. Are we doing enough of that? No. Has it increased the pressure a lot? Yes. So all the people who are against Ukraine aid need to realize that the only reason why there's this boom in defense contracting, the only reason why there's this urgency about the defense industrial base, and the only reason why Biden is doing even a little bit of this is Ukraine. It's not Taiwan. Taiwan is the big threat, or not even Taiwan, but just China in general. Philippines could be basically war with China. That's the overwhelming threat. It's much more dangerous than Russia. It's much bigger, much more dangerous, can produce infinitely more stuff than Russia can. And Russia has Europe to balance it out, blah, blah, blah. But the point is that the effort to supply Ukraine has filled orders for defense contractors and started to resuscitate the defense industrial base that we were letting lie derelict since the end of the Cold War. So that's good. We need to do a lot more of that because we need to understand that it's not just Russia we're fighting at this point. It's Chinese production. That's going to be really hard. The other thing we need to do besides resuscitate our defense industrial base, by the way, is get alliances together. So Biden's actually been a lot better on this. We've been very, very good at upgrading and intensifying the U.S.-Japan alliance, which is especially good because Japan actually can produce stuff cheaply, somewhat, and we can produce stuff with Japan. So then, they can help us build ships and missiles and stuff like that to some extent. So that's been very good. We've upgraded our alliance with the Philippines, so we're able to put bases near Taiwan, and we're starting to craft an alliance with India. It'll be a long time before that happens, but that's what we really need to work hard on, that alliance with India. And a lot of people are like, oh no, Modi, blah blah blah, he's bad. No, who cares? He's not so bad that we don't want to make an alliance with him. We want to make an alliance with India, and so we really need to do that. That's very important. India is obviously still a poor country, but it's a very large country and it's growing and it has a surprising amount of technological, acumen. So it's definitely a country we need to ally with, and we also need to work on, prodding Europe to, especially Germany, to take a stronger stance toward Russia here. They really need to be the arsenal of democracy in Ukraine and East Europe. If they don't do that, we just won't have the capacity to do this two-front war thing that we used to do, or that we used to say we were able to do. And we can't do that anymore. We're too small. China's too big. And so we're going to have to get Europe to really upgrade. So those are the things that we can do. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's better than not doing it.
Yeah. And just to zoom out for people who hadn't read the post on the World War III post, in terms of one thing you say is this idea that you make this comparison to World War II, and you say that there were a number of wars, I believe 6, leading up to World War II that helped sort of accelerate or get us into it. And at the time, people didn't realize that that these wars were leading up to World War II, and it's possible that depending on what happens next, history might see sort of the war in Ukraine or sort of the conflict in Gaza or Israel as also leading up to the next World War. Why don't you unpack the potential analogy or what you were trying to say there?
Right, absolutely. So World War II, leading up to World War II, there were a whole bunch of smaller wars that in the end ended up merging with World War II, or sort of being harbingers of that. There was the Spanish Civil War, which was a proxy war in which, Nazi and Italian fascist forces and Soviet forces both fought each other actually on the battlefield a little bit. There was the Japanese invasion of Manchuria to be followed by the Japanese invasion of China proper, and some Japanese Soviet border conflicts in Asia. There was the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. Even before the Soviet Union got involved in World War II, it was invading Finland, and it invaded Poland along with Germany, actually cooperating with the Nazis to dismantle Poland. So there were a lot of sort of lead-ups to World War II, sort of initial little tremors that were like, and then the big one happened. And so it's or when you see one of those fertilizer explosions, you see little explosion, big, slightly bigger explosion, slightly bigger explosion, boom, and There's your cold open.
Yes, exactly.
So
Love it.
so that's what's basically happened in World War II. But what's interesting is that you saw something similar right after World War II. You saw this at the beginning of the Cold War. You saw the Korean War, which was a pretty big war, killed millions of people, and you saw the Berlin airlift. Later, you saw the Soviet invasion of Hungary. So you saw in the 50s some of these things that could have turned, and then you saw a whole bunch of little civil wars like Malaysia, or killings in places like Indonesia. You saw a lot of this stuff that could have exploded into World War III very easily, except it didn't. It instead turned into a Cold War because we showed restraint. And so when I talk about Cold War II between basically the US and China, uh, people say, oh no, we don't want a Cold War. We should just not do that. Well, what people don't understand yet and what people need to internalize is that Cold War II is the good case and that World War III is the bad case, right? We're either making Cold War II the sequel or, World War III, the Revenge of She. I don't know. The point is that we're going to be having one or the other. And I suggest that we have the Cold War instead of the World War because the World War would be really bad and people would die and their kitties and puppies would die and their families would die and that would suck. And the idea that we can just sort of like back off and surrender to China and then everything will be okay is, diluted because China will take that opportunity to do whatever it can to permanently weaken and dismantle the United States. So, because to make sure that we never in a position to choose otherwise than what we did choose that time. How do we know this? Because we did this to Germany and we did this to Russia. So we know China will do it to us.
And
So, yeah.
how could a Cold War end other than one side collapsing like it did in the original?
Oh, I mean, you can end just by having different people come to power who are less inclined to fight.
Yeah.
You could have if China went back to having people like Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao in China, those kind of guys, like they could just calm down. They could just say, okay, you know what, we don't need to fight here. Let's have a more constructive relationship. Let's just blah blah go visit each other's countries and then like post memes and whatever. And so like that could happen. We had periods of detente with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was ideological. And the Soviet Union had this dysfunctional economic system. It was not rich, right? It was a country with chronic problems and chronic ethnic problems. The Soviet Union, like the Baltic people and Ukrainians and Kazakhs and all these people, did not want to be ruled by the Russians, right? So you had these ethnic sort of imperial problems, and then you had economic problems. You had bread lines and shortages of all kinds, and people living in nasty places. And so you had all these problems, and the way that the Soviet Union papered over that was to sort of keep the conflict with the US going. But China's economy just does a lot better of a job of providing a decent living for its people than the Soviet Union did. Although it's not necessarily richer. They do have some ethnic issues. They repress the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and they repress the Tibetans. But mostly, for the most part, China's, China proper, the very populous part of China, is homogeneous and it's like middle class. And so that's the kind of situation where people don't necessarily want to fight. And China is aging really rapidly. China right now, the big millennial generation, the last big generation in China is the millennial generation, and it's like basically people in their 30s right now. And so that those people are gonna sort of age out of the system within the next couple decades, start aging out. Maybe 3 decades, let's say they'll age out. And then they have one more sort of like medium-sized generation, which is the Gen Alphas, who are now like 10 to 15, right? And it's a smaller bulge. But then the point is that China, the youth in China is just shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. That removes the fundamental impetus to conflict in terms of, angry young men kind of thing. And the gender imbalance is correcting itself as well. So like, I think basically it's possible that China will be in a much more peaceful mood in a while. It's just that, we have Xi Jinping in power now. It may be that he leaves a successor who's equally ideological, but the point is that, China is not as dysfunctional as the USSR, and it's not as ideologically implacably opposed to the West, wanting to spread communism throughout the world as the USSR. So the Cold War is more a function of personalities and less a function of, ideologies than it was in the Cold War.
How do you contrast Xi Jinping to Putin?
So, they're good friends. They always talk about what great friends they are. Obviously, Xi Jinping sincerely likes Putin. He's gone to bat for him in times when it would have been more rational to throw him under the bus, and lots of Xi Jinping's advisors were saying you got to throw this guy under the bus. But basically, so Putin is a revanchist, which means Putin basically said, okay, we lost the Cold War, we were humiliated and defeated, and now we've got to get our empire back. We've got to restore what we had before. And of course, Hitler is that. That doesn't mean Putin's Hitler, but it means that they both have the tendency to invade neighbors in order to restore a historical empire. So, Putin is not necessarily looking at the USSR, although he does think the USSR was a Russian ethnic empire, which to some degree it was. But he's really looking at the old Russian Empire of the czars, and he talks about it constantly, this old empire. Most countries do not want to restore the old empire. The British do not want to restore the empire of Queen Victoria, right? The French do not want to restore the empire of whatever, right? Well, maybe they do, but who cares? But then, Japan has no desire to restore the fascist, sort of empire of the early 20th century. No desire to do that. But Putin wants to. He wants to bring back the Russian Empire. He wants to rule Poland. He wants to rule the Baltics. He wants to rule, Romania and those little guys. But the most important one is Poland, because Poland has always kind of been this rival for influence within the Slavic world. They fought Russia a bunch of times. One time they even won. But then, well, no, they've actually Russia has failed to conquer them like one or two times, and so Poland occasionally fights off the Russians, but not always. Sometimes the Russians conquer part of it and are really mean and repress it and make it poor. Because Poland is, it's different than Russia. It's Catholic. Actually, what's interesting is that a lot of traditionalist trads in America think that Russia is this very like trad religious place where like, the women are well behaved and respect their husbands and no, Poland is much more trad than Russia. Poland people go to church, mass. They have much more traditional marriage, much lower like divorce, things like that. So Poland is a much more traditionalist society than Russia, but it's Catholic, right? And Russia's Orthodox. Polish is a different language. It's written with the Roman alphabet, not the Cyrillic alphabet. So Russia always felt, but ethnically they're Slavic and they have a lot of Slavic customs. And Russia always felt that this was a big threat from way back in the day. Ukraine is obviously the battlefield between Poland. Ukraine and Belarus are the two battlefields between Poland and Russia, Russian influence, right? Because the Ukrainian and Belarusian languages are sort of both halfway between Polish and Russian. And, the influences, the cultural influences are both, sort of a mishmash of Polish and Russian. And so, those are the natural battlegrounds, and Russia doesn't want that. So Russia wants to subjugate Poland. And, Poland is an industrial power now, like an industrial powerhouse. They have really built up their economy a ton. They're still growing rapidly, even though they're like decently rich now. They're headed for developed country status. They're really a developed country now, and they're headed for even higher developed country status, and they're starting to produce a lot of like arms and munitions and stuff. So Poland's not going to go down without a fight. And the European countries have to decide if they're just going to like let that war happen, and so that's going to be a tough one. So anyway, that's what's going on there. Putin is trying to restore the Russian Empire now. Xi Jinping, there is a little bit of this going on. So why do they want Taiwan? Partly because there's like people who say we're the Republic of China and Taiwan, you want to crush them. Fine. But the main reason is because Taiwan was owned by the Qing dynasty. Taiwan was traditionally not owned by China, but then it was owned by like the Dutch for a while, and then like pirates, and then like independent, and then like Japan. But in there at some point it was owned by the Qing dynasty. And she therefore thinks, oh, this is our historical right to control this. Because, if my dynasty doesn't control all the stuff that the other dynasties controlled, then we're lesser dynasty. Actually, it's smarter of China to accept, tighter boundaries to be a more cohesive, state. So the Ming dynasty actually was smart about this. The Ming dynasty is, okay, we're not going to try to conquer Central Asia. That was dumb. We're just going to get more Mongol attacks. If we do this, we're just going to like fortify our borders. And they did. And actually the Ming dynasty lasted really long. It was pretty stable, pretty rich. It was richer than Europe at the time. They also had some explorers, but then, so this also, isolationism was bad for China, but not trying to conquer Central Asia under the Ming Dynasty was probably a good idea for China, because trying to conquer Central Asia led to mass imported instability a number of times in the Tang Dynasty, later on. And so basically, but so she's not going to do that. But more importantly, she is not is not heading a declining power. She is heading a rising power, perhaps the only power right now at the apex of its power. Right? China is the only country at the peak right now in the whole world. Everywhere else is either past the peak, like maybe South Korea is like a bit past the peak, and Taiwan's a bit past the peak. But then, maybe Poland's at the peak, but it's like small. But then China's the only like major power that's at the peak, and because India is coming up, but it's not there yet. Right? It'll be a couple decades before India reaches anything like that level. And that's under optimistic scenario. So China is at the peak right now, and of course, when you have that kind of power, you might want to take it out for a spin. You might want to say, well, what can we do with this? We could bully Vietnam into being our quasi satellite. We could maybe bully Japan into being our quasi satellite. We could bully Korea. We could bully the Philippines. We could do these things. We could take all these islands that we feel like we ought to have. We could, So I think that she is motivated more by by the fact that China has gotten all this power. The fact that it's like we have to do something with this power we've accumulated. While Putin is more like, no, we have to get it back because we lost it.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erikaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.
And that relates to a question that Tom in London has, which is you've written as of 2 years ago that it would not be obvious for the U.S. to defeat China if it were to go to war with it, and it feels like most people are underrating China in your view. What do you see that other people don't see? And why is China, like Peter Zeihan, of course, has been super negative when talking about China's ability to feed itself or its demographic collapse, et cetera. But as a actual threat to the U.S. in a war, what do you see that other people don't see, or why do you think it's not as clear cut as it looks?
Well, okay, so I think that people are rapidly coming around on my view. I am seeing tons of articles in the Wall Street Journal, in the foreign policy mags, foreign affairs, whatever, saying America could easily lose this war. So I think that what used to be me sort of shouting into the wilderness 5 years ago, now people sort of buy. What I see is, number one, looking at World War II, you see that the United States actually had, in many ways, slightly worse tech than the Nazis, and in some ways even worse tech than Japan, at least at the beginning. We crushed in that war because we outproduced, and China can outproduce. So, production of pretty good stuff, like massive amounts of pretty good stuff, beats small, amounts of really good stuff. And that's the lesson of World War II. And what could that stuff be? It could be missiles. It could be drones. It will be missiles. It will be drones. Maybe artillery shells and stuff like that. But I think missiles and drones are just sort of the key here. And ships, missiles, drones, ships. That's it. We need to produce that stuff. China can produce that stuff. We can't. That's a fundamental danger to the world, because we have this like stuff that we produced decades ago that we're still operating, but that stuff's going to age out, right? We can keep sort of patching it up, but it's going to age out, and we need to produce a whole lot more stuff very fast, or we're sort of screwed. And that's one thing I see. The other so technology, people think we have the advantage, but no, production will work. Our technological advantage is much lower than it used to be. We still have some, like we can do true stealth. China can't do stealth. Like there's a few things we can do that they can't. That's good. That's good. That will help even things out a bit. But their production advantage is so overwhelming that it won't matter. The second one is experience. So people say, "Oh, we know how to fight because we fought in these little wars." China hasn't. They haven't fought a war since blah blah blah. Well, okay, but when Germany did World War One, and Germany performed the best of any country in World War One, it lost because it got jumped by everyone in the world. Right? It got jumped by America, Russia, France, and the British Empire at its peak. And it still almost won. It came very close. It beat Russia, in the end, and then it came very close to beating Britain and France before the United States came and just overwhelmed it. And Germany at that point had not fought a war since the early 1870s. So Germany had not fought a war for about 40 years when they fought World War One, and they still did amazing, right? One reason is because war had changed. We had, you see World War One, all this artillery and machine guns and barbed wire. That was all new, right? And so war has changed now. We see that war has changed with drones. It's not the same kind of war it would have been in the 90s or even in the 2000s. Like the creation of cheap missiles and drones and like low Earth orbit satellites and a whole bunch of things has just absolutely changed the game. AI, autonomy, all these technologies have changed the game in terms of warfare, and we don't yet know exactly how they've changed the game. Ukraine is providing us with an important previews, but even there, things are changing so fast that the Ukraine war now doesn't look like the Ukraine war 2 years ago. And so it's going to change. The battlefield will change during the war, and so the idea that America has this important experience advantage is like Japan had this incredible experience advantage over America in World War II. So if you look at the early naval conflict, the naval battles like Savo Island or Tassafaronga or some of these battles, Japan was just kicking our ass at night fighting with surface ships. They were just kicking our ass because they were so good at this. But then fast forward 2 years and we were kicking their ass. Even just like 1-for-1 with the same ships, we learned. We got better, and we ended up kicking their butt, and they started out kicking our butt. Aircraft carriers, if you look at those early aircraft carriers, we did win the Battle of Midway. That was a huge battle but there was a lot of luck involved in that. So, it was actually a lot more similar between the United States and Japan in terms of aircraft carriers than it was in terms of surface ships. But they were really good with surface ships and beat us in the early battles. So the point is that humans learn. And if you think that humans don't learn or that Chinese people can't learn, you have your head in the sand and you're an ostrich. So don't do that. China will learn, China will produce, China will improve, blah, blah, blah. And so that's what's going to happen in a World War III scenario. So we need to be better prepared than we are.
Yeah. And another listener question, Jackson asks, how does the new Axis compare to the old Axis?
They're much more formidable because the old Axis was a couple of medium-sized countries, right? They were medium-sized countries that were quite good at war and started out with large militaries and were very aggressive, and they made some headway. But ultimately, when the United States and the Soviet Union both got involved against them, it was done. It was over, right? End of 1941, the war was over. Like it was all over, but for the fighting and dying, right? Most of the dying was left to be done. But the war is effectively decided at that point by the balance of forces because we outproduced them. And so the new Axis is not quite as apocalyptically evil as Hitler, or as insanely overconfident as Imperial Japan, because Japan basically was just insanely overconfident because they just didn't. Like the people who were actually driving the country to war didn't understand how, like, the fact that Japan's strength was limited. But Hitler was just nuts. He was just going to keep on trying to conquer until like the whole world burned. So like the new Axis is not that scary. Russia's not actually that scary. They are a threat to Europe because Europe is like moribund. Europe is desiccated. I just want to use these long words to describe how crappy Europe is right now. Yeah, it's moribund and desiccated. It's Germany is just still in the politics of the 2000s. Like they're still like, oh, should we cancel our nuclear plants? Like I think Germany is starting to wake up, but I think that the people in power now are, sort of NPR libs of Germany who just don't know what the fuck is going on. And so they need to go, but they can't go till 2025. So that's a big, big problem. Fortunately, France is a little more dynamic. La France is they're waking up a little bit. Macron is really he's taking charge. He's like, well, if the U.S. isn't going to step up, France will step up. Guess what? We're back. It's France. And so there's a limited amount that France can actually do, but he's actually threatened to send troops to Ukraine. That's a big deal. He's being tough, and France was an important balancer of Russia back in the old days. So when they needed when Britain needed help against Russia in the Crimean War, it went to France because France actually had a large population at the time. So France was like a key state that helped to balance Russian power, and Britain and France won the Crimean War. And so France is actually important. They can produce some stuff too, and France has a fairly statist economy, so they can have their government demand that a bunch of stuff be produced, and then it gets produced. Like nuclear plants, right? So the reason France built all that nuclear and nobody else did is because France had a more activist government who was willing to underwrite these incredibly expensive projects with a very, very, very long return horizon, too long for private investors. But France, our plans are measured in centuries, says France. And so then they now they have all this nuclear power nobody else does. Guess what? France wins. So France is important, and France is sort of waking up. Germany is still not there yet. I don't know what's going on with Britain. Britain seems like it's in the midst of some sort of protracted national collapse, but I don't know what's going on. The British political class appears unable to even conceive of threats, much less respond to it. They elect people like Liz Truss, and so hopefully the British political class will pull its head out of its butt, and Britain will sort of leave the post-Brexit moment and understand that things are it needs to stand against Russia. And then maybe it can mail Dominic Cummings to Russia. But then, anyway, this is basically what's going on in Europe. Putin is not that scary. Like Russia's scary. It's certainly scary if you're facing down some Russian artillery. But geopolitically, it's not that scary. It can't really conquer the world. Iran is not scary at all. They have all these proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis who can, disrupt and fire some missiles and pirates. I don't know. They're a danger to Israel, which is like the size of New Jersey, but they're not much of a danger to anybody else. Like maybe they could close the Straits of Hormuz and block oil and stuff like that, but that would just screw them over because their entire economy depends on oil. So that would be dumb. And so Iran is not that big of a threat. It's all just China, really. China's the big threat. So without China, the new axis is it's a joke. It's Condoleezza Rice axis of evil. Even with Russia. I mean, Russia has some stuff. They have got some nukes, but without China, it's nothing. With China, it's the most formidable opponent we've ever faced. So it's all China.
This is from listener Austin Rock. He talks about this is a question about production capability matters in war.
I really like his name, by the way. Austin Rock. I love that name.
That is a great name. Okay, this is a big question. While not losing sight about the ability to make drones, warships, and bullets, how would China's manufacturing economy be affected if the U.S. decimates Shanghai, Shenzhen, and other cities highly evolved in electronics and heavy industry? Likewise, how would the U.S.'s service economy be affected until a portion transitions over to a wartime manufacturing economy? How ready manufacturing-wise are allies like NATO, Quad during the opening days?
That's all great questions. How would Chinese manufacturing economy be affected if we devastated those cities? It will take a slight dip, but it will basically be fine. Most of the factories are not in the centers of the cities. They're not where we can get them with even if we use nukes. Even if we just open up the nukes, the factories are out of town, right? They're not going to be. We can disrupt some of these networks. Blah blah. They'll work around. They have a lot of people working on stuff. They'll lay train tracks around stuff. They'll build roads around stuff. They'll drive trucks off road. They'll just they'll get people out to the factories. The factories are in the burbs. Giant sprawling eternal complexes of factories. We can't make ordnance fast enough to destroy all those factories, even if we could get to them, which we can get to some. But there's just the amount of manufacturing capacity. Eventually, then after a couple months, they'll put a lot of the stuff underground. We won't be able to get it. Remember how Russia was bombarding this steel plant in Mariupol for like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then like it was just like 5 guys holed up in a steel plant. Well, that's because that steel plant was built by the Soviets and is built underground, and so that it would be nuke proof. And so they never really took out the steel plant, no matter how much crap they dropped on top of it, because a lot of it was just buried. And so we would not be able to effectively degrade China's manufacturing capability within the early days of the war. We would need to maintain naval dominance and to totally blockade all their, not just oil, but also all metals and raw minerals. They can substitute most of that stuff. They can use coal to make synthetic fuel using the Fischer-Tropsch process, which is what the Nazis did when they were cut off from oil. And that can run tanks, that can run ships, that can run anything you want. It's more expensive than oil, right? But China has like a ton of coal. They've got as much coal as we do. We in China have like the most coal. So China could handle that. We could cut them off from like raw materials, and we can't cut them off completely, right? Like they'll be able to get a lot of stuff through. And this is even if we command the seas. Like even if we command the seas, we would be able to like cut down their traffic by like 50% or something, maybe in an optimistic scenario. They'll still get a lot through, and they'll still build a lot. So degrading China's production capacity would require, months and months and months of massive sustained bombing campaigns with ordinances of levels that we're currently not able to produce. We're talking World War II level, but like over all of China instead of just over Germany and like Japan. We're talking about like by far the largest dropping of explodey things that's ever happened. And we're talking about months and months of that. We're talking about millions of people dying, like millions of people dying. Maybe even tens of millions, hard to say because that depends on food. Like usually when you kill tens of millions of people, it's because people starve. But you don't kill that many people with explodey things typically. But then this is a really horrible thing to imagine. Like, could we do this? Yes, if our Navy commanded the seas and we ramped up massive amounts of production and China's like frontline defenses were taken out. Could we do it? Yes. Do I want to imagine us doing that? No. I don't want to dig up the ghost of Curtis LeMay and like resuscitate him. And he's like, we're like, I can control him with this demon collar. And he's like, I serve master. But really, he just wants to slip this collar and does eat your brain, right? It's like that's the ghost of Curtis LeMay is locked up in our basement. And I don't want him to get out, right? If you know who Curtis LeMay is. But anyway, so yes, in a World War scenario, if everybody's producing huge amounts of stuff and our ships and planes control the seas and skies, can we like bomb the hell out of China until they can stop producing stuff? Yeah. But like, have you seen Grave of the Fireflies? Like, have you seen what it looks like to actually do that kind of stuff? It's horrible. This is like the most horrible thing that could ever happen. It's worse than pandemics. It's worse than anything. It's, famines. It's just the worst thing. Is these giant, big, destructive, total wars. Like this is really, 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 really bad. And so, so that's kind of the answer. Wait, what was part 2 and 3? Oh, how ready are our allies? Remember that was part 3, right? Japan is a lot more ready than we are. They are getting ready very fast because they're on the front lines of this. South Korea was born ready because it was born in the Korean War. And they're small. They're small. Australia's ready, but who knows what's going on in Australian politics? Like you can't even understand their accents. But did you see that thing where AI could it could transcribe, like AI transcription can transcribe a dog barking as woof woof, but it can't transcribe an Australian accent as anything?
No, I didn't see that, but that's hilarious.
Like a dog is more intelligible than Australian accent, and I just love that. Like AI proved it. I didn't say anything. It's AI said it. Anyway, what was the second part of this comment?
Was how would the U.S. service economy be affected until a portion transitions over to a wartime manufacturing economy?
The main thing that services use is labor. It uses people. The service economy would be drained of labor. You'd think this would have a bad effect, and in fact, it will make it harder to get healthcare. It'll make it harder to get, whatever service you need. I don't know, a haircut. But it will force all of the service industries to improve productivity. So right now, a lot of the service industries are being used as de facto job programs, right? So we'll have to take some people who are currently working as kindergarten or daycare people, daycare workers, and put them in munitions plants, say, right? This happened in World War II. This would be a big war. So then we'd have to do that. That would make daycares would have to say, okay, so we had this rule of only 8 kids per person. Now we're switching it to 16. And guess what? It's just as good. And then healthcare, how you have to fill out that intake form every time you go into the goddamn doctor. Well, guess what? Now we're just like, okay, well, we're not going to make you fill in this form. What's wrong with you? Where does it hurt? And so we'll suddenly discover all these productivity improvements. So actually, this could long-term help the service economy. That is not a good reason to go to war. So please do not interpret it that way.
Well, let me ask the broader question, which is, how should we think about, what's our mental model for thinking about the effect of a war on the economy more broadly, like what World War II did for the economy, and likely what World War III would do for the economy? And obviously, of course, if it has some positive impacts, it's still not a good reason to go to war. But just because we're econ students here, what's the best way of understanding?
Well, the most important effect would be political economic. So right now we have systems in place to prevent us from building anything. We have all the things I mentioned 20 times before, like always starting with environmental review and, and regulation, land use, and various gatekeeping things and contracting requirements and blah, 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 hold up after hold up. We, a war where our country decided like we really need to bust ass on this, like we're in grave danger and we really need to produce a lot of stuff, would drop a lot of those barriers. We'd use the Defense Production Act. Whoever was in power would say, okay, now we need to use some non-union labor guys. We're going to need to not worry about that we have the exact right percent of minorities for this job. And so, if we got really serious about it, a lot of that's political in itself. Like, would we take a war that seriously, or would we just sort of collapse into our own civil war, which is obviously what China would be hoping would happen to us. And that's what Germany and Japan hoped would happen to us, but it didn't during FDR. The country really pulled together. I don't know whether that would turn out the same this time, but if it did, then I think that you could see a positive effect on our, political economy, on our ability to build stuff, including housing, including stuff like that. Is this a reason to go to war? No, this is not a good reason to go to war. But just if you're wondering how that would work, I think the primary effect would be political economic. Also, supply chains, high-tech industries, things like that. World War II helped to supercharge our economy. And I think if World War III went similarly, it would. I mean, of course, then you have to reckon with stuff that gets done to us. Like, it's not just us dropping stuff on China, it's China dropping stuff on us. They can hit us with missiles, they can hit us with nukes, they can hit, they can hit us with cyber attacks. They can remember when that ship crashed into that bridge the other day? They could make that a bunch of ships do that. And maybe, I don't know. Who knows nobody really knows what cyber war could do. There's all these stories like China hacked this and this and this. Well, what did they do with the hack? What could they do with the hack? We don't know. And so, so that would be something that we would discover. We'd get to discover this. Saboteur teams, people running around and blowing stuff up within America. That's probably not going to be a big deal, but there will be some of those guys. So they could do stuff to us too, and that has an effect as well. I don't know how big an effect that would be because I don't really know what it would entail.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to transition over to a question that Job Gregory has. He's actually got a couple of good questions. So this is an interesting one. Oh, so it's JOB.
It's JOB. Oh, so it's not GOB. So it's not like Arrested Development.
No.
Okay.
No. It's Job Gregory. Okay, so
Hey, Job.
Read his question. If in the Israel versus Hamas/Palestine conflict, Noah said that Israel should help make Palestine rich as a means to long-term peace, help them develop their economy, improve standard of living, and as they begin to get a decent standard of living, they'll be a better neighbor. I agree. But why was that same move a dumb strategy for Germany to do with Russia by buying Russian cheap energy? And by the same token, was it a bad idea for the U.S. to offshore all manufacturing to China and bring them into the free trade world of rules and agreements? Why will it work with Israel and Palestine when it failed with Germany and Russia and China and the U.S.?
That's a great question. The reason I was thinking of that is because it did work with Egypt and Jordan. So notice that when Iran, Jordan did not like Israel. I think they even fought Israel in the first war in 48. But when, Israel made peace with Jordan, and when I think they fought Jordan, actually, I don't remember that. But then certainly they didn't like them. But then when Iran shot missiles and drones at Israel the other day, Jordanian jets scrambled and helped defend Israel. They shot down the drones. Great, because why? Well, Israel gives them, Israel invests in them. Israel is sort of this kind of high tech developed nucleus of this, of the kind of western part of the Middle East, right? So Israel is an economic anchor for Egypt, which is big and poor and needs help, and it's an economic anchor for Jordan, which is always restive and has this restive population, kind of high fertility and needs help, and et cetera. And therefore, so I was thinking that Palestine could just be that. So Israel has showed an ability to make peace with Sunni powers, not with Iran, but not with the Shiite powers, because they're all controlled by Iran. Iran wants to be Israel's regional rival for influence. Iran's like, you think you're the boss? No, we're the boss. We're much bigger than you. And, blah, blah. So, like, by the way, one cool history book you can read about conflicts between Israel and Iran is the Bible, because if you look, it's just like the Old Testament is just like, and the Persians conquered the Israelites, and then the Israelites threw off their yoke, and then the Persians conquered the Israelites again. And so it's just like, it's Iran fighting Israel over and over and over and over and over. Because it's like, big country versus like angry little small country. It's like, if Russia fights Poland, right, then Iran fights Israel. Always has. And so, because basically the Middle East is really bifurcated, it's divided into sort of two population centers. There's the sort of like Mediterranean, Europe facing western part of the Middle East, which also includes the Nile, right? You've got that stuff. And then you've got the eastern part of the Middle East with like the plateau of Iran and Iraq, Fertile Crescent, Baghdad, and all that stuff. Basically, the Middle East is in like two parts, and the one part's always trying to conquer the other part. And so that's basically what's going on there. And so if you want to essentialize it historically, but Palestinians, the problem there is that Palestinians are just normal people, but then, they're not like insane. They're not super religious, and they're not super like insane, whatever. The problem is that everyone in the world, including all these leftists and including the Iranians, keep telling them, go Palestinians, kill, kill, kill. The Jews are almost dead. And if you ask Palestinians how many Jews are there in Israel, they think they outnumber the Jews 4-1. They don't. They're outnumbered 2-1, but they think they outnumber the Jews. And so it's like, it's only a matter of time before we kill them all. We're going to kill them all. And like, the point is that the foreigners, the Western leftists and the Iranians keep egging them on and telling them like, the Jews are almost dead. Just a little more violence and you'll kill all the Jews. No, you won't. And it's stupid for them to believe this, but they don't have better sources of information. And really, Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and like Egypt need to start just getting information to the Palestinians and saying to the Palestinians, look, Palestinians, you're not going to kill all the Jews, right? All the Israelis. You have to live with them. And just start propagandizing them and counter Iranian propaganda, because like Palestinians, they speak Arabic. So, like they'll understand what you say to them. And so if the Palestinians got leadership that accepted the state within, the West Bank and Gaza, and if Israelis like Netanyahu could, or whoever's in power in Israel can be made to accept that as well. If that situation can be accepted, then I think that, Israel and Palestine can have a synergistic economic relationship for the long term, not just, with Russia or China.
And speaking of Iran, Israel, in terms of interpreting the actions over the past few days, do you take the interpretation that, hey, this was just a sort of a way to stand tough, but they didn't really mean to? It's all bark, no bite, and thus, as a result,
I don't know.
What do you think?
I don't know.
Hard to say.
Yeah, who knows what they're thinking? You could interpret it that way, but I have no information one way or another.
Yeah. And do you have any does this conflict just continue in perpetuity? Like, there's no line of sight to mitigate it?
Right. Well, like I said, the Bible. But on a positive note, modern, the modern positive sum economics of positive sum production allows us to, coupled with lower fertility, allows us a way out of traditional conflict patterns. And so one thing you notice, so the Middle East will run out of oil. It's already starting to happen. We don't talk about it, but it's already starting to happen. The Middle East will have to transition to an industrialized economy, and Israel can help in ways that Iran cannot. In fact, Israel could help Iran. And so they need Israel for their future, probably. And they need the Europeans too. And they can't just like become part of this like anti-Western, like Iranian, like revenge, like resistance bloc, because like they'll run out of oil and there's just no way to sustain it. Like China's not going to like pour resources into you and sustain it all. But also what you see is that the Middle East's fertility rates are going down. And I wrote a post about this like last year. Middle Eastern, most Middle Eastern countries are already near or below replacement level fertility. You have a few that are above. So Egypt is still above, Syria is still above, Yemen is still above, Iraq is still above. So those are reasonably populous countries, but like Iran is down, Saudi Arabia is down. A lot of these countries are their fertility is way down. Hezbollah, one reason Hezbollah hasn't like been willing to go to war against Israel is because the fertility of the Shia in Lebanon is very low now, and the fertility of the Sunnis in Lebanon, who sort of want to take control of the country, is higher, and so they're growing while the Shia are sort of shrinking, and so the Hezbollah is in great danger. If they get their forces decimated, they could lose control of the country and become an oppressed minority within Lebanon. So that's when Yemen is their fertility transition started much later and started from a much higher point. Like, go back 10 years, like Yemenis have 7 kids. Well, now it's 3 or whatever, but like still, it's a lot. Iraq's fertility's fallen lower than Iraq and Egypt have actually, their fertility's fallen a little slower than other places. Iraq, maybe because of war and violence. Egypt, like, I honestly don't know why. But the point is that eventually those fertility rates go down and your youth bulge goes away. And once your big generation, your last big generation, the generation that first stopped having kids, right? Once they age into middle age, like your pressure for war is sort of done. Their demographic pressure for war is done. And coupling that with sort of the end of oil and the end of like angry young men. Also, we don't talk about this much, but the traditional values that govern the Middle East are going away now because of the internet, which is what the great destroyer of traditional values. We talk about like Christianity going away in the West. Well, Islam in the Middle East and wherever Islam is, as soon as people get cell phones and they start like looking at a bunch of porn, and it's porn. And it's porn, but it's also just talking to people, right? Like they can talk to people in China or Russia or whatever. They can see things beyond their horizon. Their society isn't just like, the Islamic charity organizations of their local neighborhood. And whatever. So their horizons broaden at the same time as they're exposed to sex culture. And then not just porn, but like there's all this stuff saying like, you too can pick up girls. Here's how to do it. Like, whoa, I can pick up girls, like I don't have to, work my whole life to be a pillar of the community so that I can have 4 wives and, blah, blah, bullshit. Like, no, you can like, patriarchy's done, son. You can just go to the club and like, and this is what happened in the West. What?
That's the cold open.
Right. That's the cold open. Patriarchy's done, son. You can go to the club. No, you just fire up Tinder. Like, I don't even know if they allow the dating apps in Middle Eastern countries, actually. But I do know that religiosity is dropping. Sort of westernized dating sex culture is proliferating. And this is what destroys traditionalism. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? You know that song?
I don't know that song.
Oh, it's from after World War I. So the people from World War I all came back, and like all these American like farm boys, because America was still, a lot of it was agricultural. So we took all these extra sons from the farm, like shipped all the farm boys, the doughboys, right? We shipped all the farm boys to Europe, and and then they were like, whoa, dense walkable urbanism. Whoa, girls. And so then like they're all like hooking up with French girls, hooking up with like Italian girls or whatever, right? And then like you read novels of World War I or like memoirs of World War I, it's all about how these like basically like traditionalist, slightly shy American boys are like hooking up with European women who actually do that kind of thing. And they come back and they're like, whoa. And then you have like the Roaring 20s, right? Because everybody learned how to hook up. And so cultural liberalization, we use euphemisms like cultural liberalization, but because it's the 2020s and I can say these things on a podcast, I will. And that's what we meant. And that's what that song meant. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Is a song from America from that time.
Yes, perfect. So with that, let's wrap. We're a bit over time, but no, this has been a great episode as always, and we got a lot of listener questions in, and we have more to get to next week, and encourage people to submit more in.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.